This pile of scrap isn't worth a single dime." Jazelle Harmon laughed, letting the sound bounce off the crumbling, graffiti-covered walls of the alleyway. She didn't bother handing the rusted ring of keys to Caleb. Instead, the billionaire real estate developer just opened her manicured hand and let them drop straight into the muddy gravel next to his work boots. "But if you really want to buy my garbage for $1,000, go ahead and sign right here." Caleb Merritt didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice, and he certainly didn't tell her how arrogant she sounded. He just slowly bent down, picked up the keys, and wiped the grime off the brass with his thumb. He signed the paper on her assistant's clipboard without a second thought. That $1,000 was literally every last cent he had to his name. It was the entirety of his severance package, after a massive corporate merger wiped out his engineering division just 4 weeks ago. If this crazy gamble failed, he and his 8-year-old son, Leo, would be sleeping in the cab of his old pickup truck by the end of the month. But Caleb wasn't the kind of man to let fear dictate his future. He knew perfectly well that sometimes the greatest opportunities look exactly like a pile of trash to people who don't know how to build things. If you also believe that the people who get laughed at the hardest are usually the ones who end up building something incredible, hit that subscribe button to walk this journey with us. The garage Jazelle had just sold him was an absolute nightmare. The roof was sagging, the windows were shattered, and the floor was buried under decades of industrial waste and rotting cardboard. Jazelle had only sold it to him because paying a demolition crew to clear out the toxic mess would have cost her development firm 10 times what Caleb just handed her. She thought she was taking advantage of a desperate, foolish man. She had no idea who she was actually dealing with. Caleb was the kind of guy who could figure out how a machine worked just by listening to it hum. He had a terrifyingly fast learning curve and an unshakable mindset. Instead of sitting around complaining about losing his corporate job, he immediately got to work. His first priority wasn't even the garage itself. It was showing his son how to survive when the world pulls the rug out from under you, out in the tiny, overgrown patch of dirt behind the shop. Caleb cleared away the rusted mufflers and broken glass. He and Leo spent their first weekend building a small vegetable garden using reclaimed wood. They even repurposed an old, thoroughly cleaned industrial water drum into a makeshift pond, filling it with a few cheap koi fish. Caleb handed his son a small trowel and showed him how to pack the soil around the tomato seeds. "Financial freedom doesn't start with a giant paycheck, buddy," Caleb told him, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It starts with knowing how to plant seeds in the dark and trusting the process." Have you ever had to start completely over from absolute zero? If you have, I want you to drop a comment right now and say, "I don't fear failure. The best rewards come to those who wait." Let that be a reminder to yourself that you are still in the game. By the second week, Jazelle's people started coming around to harass them. Her men in sharp suits would stand at the edge of the property, taking photos and making loud jokes about the homeless shelter Caleb was running. They wanted him to tear the building down quickly, so it wouldn't become an eyesore for her upcoming megamall project next door. Caleb completely ignored them. He rolled up his sleeves, put on his heavy leather gloves, and started moving mountains of trash by hand. It was grueling, back-breaking labor. But on the 5th day of clearing out the darkest corner of the shop, something stopped him dead in his tracks. It was a smell. As a former mechanical engineer, Caleb's brain was hardwired to recognize certain chemical signatures. He caught the faint, distinct scent of old, heavyweight motor oil. It wasn't the cheap synthetic stuff used in modern commuter cars. This was the rich, metallic aroma of high-performance oil, designed for vintage V8 engines. The smell was coming from beneath a massive, moldy canvas tarp that had been buried under a collapsed section of shelving. His heart started to hammer against his ribs. He called Leo over, and together, they grabbed the heavy canvas and pulled hard. A thick cloud of dust exploded into the air, causing them both to cough and wave their hands. When the dust finally settled, Caleb couldn't believe what he was looking at. Sitting there, covered in a thick layer of grime but entirely intact, was the chassis of a 1967 Ford Mustang. And not just any Mustang. It was painted in the legendary Highland Green. Caleb traced his fingers over the original factory badging, his mind racing. Jazelle had been in such a rush to get rid of the property that she never bothered to actually inspect what was under the garbage. But the surprises didn't stop there. As Caleb tore away the remaining tarps deeper in the shadows, his jaw tightened. There wasn't just one car. There were 8 of them. Lining the back wall of the forgotten shop were some of the rarest classic muscle cars in American history. He uncovered a pristine, though heavily rusted, Camaro 28. Right next to it sat a genuine Tomaso Pantera, a car so rare that collectors spent decades trying to track one down. Anyone else would have immediately called the news or tried to sell the scrap metal for a quick buck. But Caleb was a strategist. He knew these cars were worth nothing in their current state, but fully restored, they were multi-million-dollar unicorns. He didn't say a word to anyone outside that garage. Instead, he did what he did best. He went to a pawn shop, bought a cheap digital camera, and set it up on a rusty tripod in the corner of the shop. He hit record. He decided to document every single second of this restoration journey on YouTube, building an online business while he resurrected these ghosts of the road. As he picked up a heavy wrench and approached the Mustang to turn the very first rusted bolt, he looked right into the camera lens. "I don't fear failure. The best rewards come to those who wait." For the next 3 months, Caleb and Leo practically lived in that dusty garage. He worked through the nights, while his son slept in a makeshift bedroom they built in the small front office. His hands were permanently stained with dark grease and rust, but every single evening, no matter how exhausted he was, he edited and posted a new video. He didn't use flashy effects, loud music, or clickbait titles. He just showed the raw, honest process of a father bringing a forgotten piece of history back to life. He filmed himself teaching Leo how to hand sand the primer on the Mustang's fenders. Slowly but surely, the internet started to take notice of this quiet corner of the world. Car enthusiasts from across the country tuned in to watch the Highland Green paint finally hit the metal. They loved the quiet determination of the man wielding the wrench. Meanwhile, outside the garage walls, the corporate world was moving fast. The commercial zoning plans for the new mega mall were in their final stages of approval. Jazelle Harmon was sitting in her penthouse office when she realized there was a massive problem with her blueprints. The main entrance to her billion-dollar plaza was completely blocked by Caleb's tiny, ragged property line. She assumed this would be an incredibly easy fix. She drove her sleek black SUV right up to the garage doors one Tuesday morning. She didn't even bother getting out of the car to speak to him. She just rolled down the tinted window and held out a cashier's check for $10,000. She told Caleb to pack up his tools, take the cash, and clear out by Friday afternoon. She said it was an overly generous offer for a glorified dumpster. Caleb wiped his hands on a blue shop towel and walked slowly over to her car. He didn't take the check from her hand. He just looked her in the eye, perfectly calm. Before Jazelle could open her mouth to insult him again, a sound echoed from inside the shop. It wasn't a clank, a rattle, or a sputter. It was a deep, guttural roar that violently shook the concrete under their feet. Leo had just turned the key, firing up the rebuilt V8 engine of the 1967 Mustang for the very first time. The ground actually vibrated from the sheer horsepower. Jazelle's coffee spilled directly onto the pristine leather console of her expensive SUV. Caleb leaned in slightly toward her window. He politely informed her that his property wasn't for sale at any price. 2 weeks later, the alleyway outside the garage looked entirely different. There were no garbage trucks, city inspectors, or demolition crews. Instead, a long line of luxury vehicles and private security SUVs stretched down the entire block. Caleb was hosting a private, invite-only auction, right there on the freshly power-washed concrete floor. His dedicated YouTube audience had brought his masterpiece to the attention of elite car collectors globally. Under the bright halogen work lights, the Mustang, the Camaro, and the Pantera gleamed like polished jewels. They weren't just cars anymore. They were masterclasses in mechanical revival and human resilience. When the final gavel came down that night, Caleb didn't just have his life savings back. The combined sale of the 3 fully restored classics brought in over $3.5 million in pure cash. If you are watching this and cheering for Caleb right now, I want you to drop our motto in the comments. Right. I don't fear failure. The best rewards come to those who wait. Jazelle found out about the auction the next morning from a wealthy investor who had personally attended. She was absolutely furious. She realized she had literally handed a multi-million-dollar gold mine to a guy in dirty boots for $1,000. But her absolute worst nightmare was just beginning. Jazelle thought she still had the upper hand because her firm owned the massive dirt lots behind his garage. She planned to suffocate his new business with construction dust, noise complaints, and endless legal battles. But Caleb wasn't just a skilled mechanic. He was a man who deeply understood how to read a financial map and anticipate the market. He knew the official city zoning announcement was scheduled for that very afternoon at City Hall. With over $3 million sitting safely in his business account, Caleb didn't buy a mansion or a sports car for himself. He spent the entire morning quietly purchasing all the distressed residential plots immediately surrounding Jazelle's project site. He bought them at a premium, directly from the struggling families who lived there, giving them a fair way out of poverty. By noon, he had completely encircled her planned commercial development. When the city officially announced the new commercial zone at 2 o'clock, property values in that specific area instantly skyrocketed. Jazelle's lead attorney called her in a blind panic. Her highly publicized billion-dollar project was completely landlocked. She couldn't build access roads, lay sewage pipes, or run commercial power lines without crossing land now legally owned by Caleb Merritt. Her entire monopoly was shattered in a single day. The arrogant billionaire who had once thrown dirty keys in the dirt was now trapped in a financial cage of her own making. She had absolutely no choice but to request a formal sit-down meeting with the man she had called a dreamer. She had to buy the access rights from Caleb at a price that he solely got to dictate. He didn't yell at her, gloat, or demand a public apology. He simply handed her a legally binding contract, with a number that secured his family's financial freedom for generations. A year later, the crumbling old garage was gone. In its place stood a state-of-the-art restoration academy for young, underprivileged mechanics in the city. Caleb walked out back to the large garden he had originally built with Leo. The vegetable patches were thriving beautifully, and the koi pond had been properly expanded with a small waterfall. Leo was picking ripe tomatoes, laughing warmly in the afternoon sun. Caleb watched his son, knowing deep down they would never have to worry about a sudden layoff or a cruel landlord ever again. He had successfully built an empire from the dirt up. This is the ultimate proof that your current situation is never your final destination. Before this video ends, make sure you leave one last comment to seal this mindset. Type, "I don't fear failure. The best rewards come to those who wait." Keep planting those seeds in the dark, and never let anyone tell you your dreams are just garbage.